He thought it would be just another quiet visit. No security, no announcement, no one knowing who he really was. A successful CEO walking into one of his own stores disguised as an ordinary customer, just to see how things truly ran when the boss wasn't watching. What he found that day wasn't poor service or sloppy shelves. It was a janitor, hidden in a corner, tears running down his face, whispering words no one should ever have to say. Something had broken inside that man, and the reason why would expose a darkness far deeper than anyone imagined. What could drive a hardworking man to this point? It started like any other morning for him, the CEO, a man who had built his empire. From the ground up, believed in walking the floors of his stores without the fanfare of titles or recognition. On that day, he chose one of his oldest locations, a place that had once been the foundation of his dream. Dressed in plain clothes, he blended in with the customers and staff. No one realizing the man browsing the aisles was the owner himself. He wanted to feel the pulse of his business, the energy of his people, the truth behind the polished reports his managers sent to his desk. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Shelves were stocked, cash registers humming, and employees moving briskly between tasks, but beneath that surface of normalcy, something felt off. There was a tension in the air, a silence between the polite smiles of workers as if everyone carried an invisible weight. And then he saw him, the janitor, hunched over his mop, eyes swollen, trying to hide behind a stack of cleaning supplies. He looked older than his years, shoulders sagging as though the world had pressed down on them for too long. The CEO's instinct told him this wasn't about a bad, it was a day or simple exhaustion. There was pain in that man's expression, a kind that went deeper than work stress. He watched carefully, unnoticed, as a manager walked by and muttered something under his breath, smirking in a way that made the janitor shrink further into himself. It was subtle, almost invisible to the casual eye. But it was enough to reveal that something was wrong. He thought to himself, what would I do if I were in this man's place? If the very people I worked alongside treated me with disdain, would I endure it in silence or fight back? For a moment, the CEO wondered how many others had suffered like this, unseen and unheard, right under his leadership. He knew he had to find out. As the CEO moved deeper into the store, he kept a careful eye on the janitor. The man tried to carry on with his duties, pushing the mop, gathering trash, straightening chairs, but every movement was slow, heavy, like a person dragging chains behind him. The air around him seemed to thicken, as if sorrow itself clung to his skin. And then it began to unfold. A group of employees passed nearby, laughing in hushed tones. Their glances were sharp, cruel, aimed at the janitor like daggers. One of them intentionally spilled a cup of soda on the freshly cleaned floor, watching with satisfaction as the janitor bent down to wipe it again. "That's your job," one of them muttered under his breath, just loud enough. The janitor didn't respond. He didn't dare. He simply bowed his head lower and cleaned up the mess. The CEO's chest tightened. He had expected to see flaws in service, maybe sloppy work habits or inattentive staff. But this was humiliation, targeted, deliberate, and silent enough that it could be ignored by anyone who chose not to see. He followed at a distance, invisible in plain clothes, and the deeper he looked, the worse it became. The janitor's locker had been defaced. Crude words scratched across the metal door, mocking his race and his dignity. His cleaning cart had been tampered with, supplies missing, tools broken, and yet no one offered to help. Hours passed like these small acts of cruelty, piling one upon another, the way raindrops can become a flood. And each time, the janitor's shoulders drooped a little lower, his silence screaming louder than any words. The CEO's mind raced. How long had this been happening? How many reports had been buried? How many complaints ignored by managers? Who smiled in his meetings but turned a blind eye here? The final crack came when the janitor stepped into the break room. Sitting alone at a corner table, he quietly opened a sandwich wrapped in old wax paper. A younger employee entered, sneered at him, and shoved the sandwich onto the floor with a mocking laugh. No one in the room stopped it, no one spoke. The janitor simply knelt, picked it up, and whispered something the CEO barely caught. "Can't take much more of this." The CEO felt fury rise inside him. But along with it came a gnawing question that he couldn't shake. If I hadn't come here undercover, how much longer would this cruelty have stayed hidden? The moment came when the CEO could no longer simply observe. He had seen enough, and every second of silence felt like betrayal. But what struck him hardest wasn't just the cruelty, it was the hopelessness in the janitor's eyes. This was more than bullying. It was the slow, crushing weight of racism, the kind that doesn't always shout but whispers every day until a person begins to believe the lies about themselves. He followed the janitor outside, where the man leaned against the back wall of the store, his hands trembling as he tried to light a cigarette. Tears streaked down his face, mixing with the dust on his cheeks. And then, in a voice broken by years of swallowing pain, he whispered, "Why do they hate me for the skin I can't change?" The CEO's heart pounded. He had fought his way up in a world that told him no black man could lead at the top. He had power now, and seeing this man an employee, human being reduced to tears in his own company's uniform, was more than he could bear. He stepped forward, ready to reveal himself, but before he could, a manager stormed out. The man's voice was sharp, dripping with disdain. As he berated the janitor for slacking off and threatened to cut his hours, the janitor didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just lowered his head, as if bracing for yet another blow. The CEO's fists clenched. This wasn't just poor management, it was targeted. It was hateful, and it was happening under his watch. Right there. In that alley behind the store, he faced the choice. Stay silent, keep his identity hidden, and gather more proof or step forward. Reveal who he was, and end the cruelty right now. His mind raced, knowing the next words out of his mouth could change everything. What would you have done in that moment? Gather more evidence, or unleash the truth on the spot? The CEO stepped forward, no longer willing to hide behind his disguise. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority that turned heads. The manager froze, startled by the sudden presence of a stranger. Before he could speak, CEO pulled out his ID card, the one no one could argue with, and placed it squarely in the manager's hand. Silence fell like a hammer. The truth hit harder than any shout. The customer was their boss, the janitor's. Eyes widened in disbelief, his trembling hands struggling to process what was unfolding. For the first time in years, someone stood between him and the abuse. The manager stammered, trying to explain away his actions, but the CEO's glare cut him down before a single excuse could form. The other employees who had mocked and tormented the janitor earlier gathered nearby, their smirks fading into panic. Suddenly, their laughter didn't echo so loud. The CEO demanded answers. Why had reports of mistreatment never reached his desk? Why had complaints been buried, covered up, or ignored? And more importantly, how could his company, his dream, become a place where racism thrived unchecked? The staff shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their heads, others biting their lips, but no one dared to speak. The janitor stood silent, a mixture of shame and relief washing over him. But the CEO knew that silence wasn't consent. It was survival. In that moment, he realized this man had been carrying an unbearable weight alone, and no one had lifted it for him. Now, with his authority exposed, the tables had turned. The very people who had mocked him only minutes before were the ones shrinking back in fear. The CEO didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was steady, razor sharp with disappointment, as he made one thing clear: there would be consequences. For the manager, for the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester, and for every bystander who chose silence over justice. And yet, as he looked at the janitor still trembling, still broken, he realized the real challenge wasn't punishing the guilty. It was restoring dignity to the man who had nearly lost it all. Because what happens after justice is delivered? Does healing truly begin, or is the damage already too deep? If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Join us at Black Rises, where we bring you powerful stories that uncover truth, expose injustice, and honor resilience. Hit the like button to show your support. Subscribe to stand with us and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Together, we rise. Together, we make a difference.